Dan ik cheo, dan ik massaneerde, dan ik chone ja. Dat han net oor jube da Hollande, neta weet ik onderste. Die kat baba han ja die da Hollande, toch zit toch zo beker dan dat dit. Ook dat hot geschiedenis dat tot dat anagosi. Dat hot in daar. Hasin zo wat is massan. Als sadikat great grandmother but the needle late die but kan ik eens ook. Ook ik massan san ja dat die ninde. Aro e pa mai ja ni massan san. Geen wat het ego dat we niet zien de. Is niet die kat beker als net order. In the storytelling of our people, there are many stories that were passed down to us from grandparents and that. And I want to explain a little bit about my great-grandmother. She was very elderly, over 100 years old when she passed on. But she was born around 1863, possibly 1862, but more likely in 1863. And she was an infant during a time when there was a lot of turmoil in the Navajo Nation and of course other Indian nations as well. And the country was embroiled in the Civil War between the North and the South. And of course President Lincoln had been in office for a couple of years, and there was a lot going on in the history of the United States. But there was also things that had happened in the past that had an effect on the Dene, or our people. And for example, the Lands Act of 1830 under Andy Jackson, the Indian Removal Act. And that was a time when Davy Crockett objected to the idea of removing the Indian people from their lands to the east. But under Andy Jackson's plan, the Indian Removal Act was to remove all the American Indian people to the west of the Mississippi River. And then of course they built a lot of military outposts, forts all along the river to kind of separate the American Indian from the European Americans. So there was a lot of conflict. And sometime around 1860 they of course passed another legislation from Congress where they made free land offers into the Indian Territory that was west of the Mississippi River. And when that happened, of course, there was a lot of influx of European Americans, settlers, and that came into the lands where a lot of different native people were living. These are American Indian people, all different tribes had the encounter with the settlers, and of course the settlers demanded protection, and so the military became available to protect the settlers and that. So the story of my great-grandmother begins when she was very much an infant around the mid-1860s or the early 1860s. And the conditions on that were very difficult for the Dene. You have to understand the history of the Dene. After 1520, when the Spaniards came into the Southwest, it was the Spaniards that were the people that they had to persuade to leave the Southwest. And eventually the Dene did by all of the problems that they gave the Spaniards, and they kept the Spaniards out of the Southwest. But the other thing that happened with that was the Mexicans that came into existence. These were the people that were the descendant from the Native American Indian and the Spaniards. And those were the ones that we call Mexicans. And they came from all different tribes, but they had intermarried with the Spaniards and they had produced the Mexican people. And our people were in great conflict with the Mexican. It was a very difficult time. Probably in the 1805, there's an incident that took place in Canyon de Chelly, where a bunch of Mexican militia came in from New Mexico and actually murdered a lot of the Navajo people in a place in Canyon de Chelly that they call a place of murder. And they gave it a Spanish name. And an incident like that happened, and there was Diné that were killed, even women, children, and the Mexicans were very vicious, and they thought nothing of killing children. And so that was an incident that happened in the early 1800s. But there was a lot of unrest when the Spaniards left, and then we had to deal with our people dealt with the Mexican people. They still, the Diné, tried to discourage these people by raiding their settlements and taking their property, which would be livestock or anything that they could use. And the Mexicans, of course, would retaliate by doing the same things and by taking the Diné that they could capture and putting them to slavery. And that was the one thing that the Diné really objected to, is the idea of taking slaves and putting them into forced labor to build these communities that the Mexicans were determined to do. And the Mexicans, of course, became citizens of the United States, and so they were also entitled to having military protection. And as we mentioned earlier, that the United States was in a civil war, and there was a lot of things in that was attractive to taking Indian lands. And the other thing that happened was the main military force was made up of people from the north and the south, which would be the bluecoats in the army. But when Civil War broke out, many of them were from the south, and so they left to go home to fight from the south. And so there were not very many people to provide protection for the settlers and for the people out here in the Indian Territory. And they had to replace them, so they recruited many Mexican volunteers, and they were very anxious, of course, to be engaged in eliminating and exterminating the Diné completely. And so that was something that they had desired to do. And of course, the military leadership was out in this area. They were focusing on the idea of removing Indian people from their native lands and that, because they saw the lands as potential for having gold and silver and that they could use to finance the Civil War. And so those are the things that were very enticing to the people. And so there were generals in that lied about the availability of these natural resources, and they wanted to eliminate the Diné from their lands entirely. And so they had people like General Carleton that was very much hated the Diné. In fact, he was the one that was very determined on rounding up the Diné and putting them into prison camps, or what they would probably call reserves and reservations and so on. But he recruited such people as Kit Carson, who was at one time very friendly with the Diné. And under Kit Carson's command, they gave him 1,000 men or so to round up the Diné. And most of the people that he had under his command were, of course, the Mexican volunteers. And they're the ones that came and established themselves at Fort Defiance. And then, of course, Fort Wingate. Fort Wingate originally was over near Grant, New Mexico, but they relocated it some 50 miles back toward the west. And where it is today, in present day, Fort Wingate is right close to what is now Gallup, New Mexico. But there's about a 35-mile distance between Fort Defiance and Fort Wingate. And those were the two military posts in that was located there to help round up the Diné. And so there was a lot of things in that were taking place, events in that affected the Diné directly. But it was mostly over the issue of land. And of course the name and the problem, the Indian problem, is what they came up with. Actually, this came out of Congress, is to deal with the Indian problem. And that was, in many cases, to eliminate the Native American people entirely and have them to give up their lands and to locate on other portions of lands and that would be designated as Indian reserves or Indian reservations. And so the conditions in that were very unpleasant for the Dene. And of course, in military activity around that particular time, the Gatling gun, sort of predating the machine gun, was invented and used against the Dene. And they had them available at Fort Wingate and Fort Defiance. And the conditions were in the wintertime very harsh for the Dene. And they call it is the way that they refer to it, is running from the bluecoats or running from the enemy. The Dene, around the time of the early 1860s, were a peaceful people. They wanted to have peace. But the problem that a lot of historians don't realize is that among the Dene, you could make peace with one clan family, and they would be glad to sign a peace treaty. But then there were many other clan families in that were involved. So if you did not sign a peace treaty with that clan family, there was no peace between the settlers and that clan family. And there were many different clan families. And so it was thought that one group signing a peace treaty would cover all of the other clan families, but they did not understand that that peace treaty was only with one clan family and not the others, the many others. And so the Dene got the reputation of always breaking peace treaties and just not being very peaceful people. But the Dene themselves also thought of the settlers and the Mexicans as not being a trustworthy or a peaceful people themselves. But the other thing that bothered the Dene and most native people was that the settlers, when they came and were offered free land, they came in and they just did whatever they wanted, saying this is our land now, and all of the resources, the water and the timber and everything else is ours. And so stay away from it and don't come near it. But the Dene had it in their mind, if they would go raid these settlements, maybe they could discourage them like they did the Spaniards and make them leave. And so many of the families that did not have a peace treaty with these settlers would raid the settlements and take property like they had done with the Spaniards earlier. But after 1860, they began the same tactic. And so it was that it just created a lot more problems for the Dene and for the settlers as well. And of course the Dene have ended up having to deal with the military. And that was a time where a lot of things took place, and that's what we'll be sharing with you. And the story about my great-grandmother, who was an infant when all of this started back around about 1863.
Hey, thanks for watching our videos. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss one of our uploads. Also, head over to our website, NavajoTraditionalTeachings.com. Sign up for our email list. Okay.